I'm Renee Gittins. This is the Game Development Crisis Conference and Webinar Series. This conference is intended to equip game developers and studio leadership with the knowledge and tools they need to sustain successful development in the times of crisis. These expert panels are dedicated to the skills and tools from working from home, studio leadership in the times of change, and mental health considerations and resources for game developers. We'd like to extend a special thank you to our sponsor, Xbox. Their dedication to helping all gamers and all game developers helps make programs like this possible. Here's a short video from Xbox about their impressive GameStack ecosystem.
GameStack is the portfolio of developer tools that game developers can use to build, run, and grow their games.
Your job is to deliver something that takes the player on a journey and makes them feel something.
The most important thing is that you listen to the community.
You design for one, you solve for many.
It's really about playing your games wherever you choose to play them.
You know, gamers and developers are truly at the center of everything we do.
As mentioned, this conference is brought to you by the IGDA and Take This. IGDA's mission is to support and empower game developers around the world in achieving fulfilling and sustainable careers. If you'd like to support the IGDA and advance your career, network, and skills as a game developer, please look at the links below to join us. I am honored to introduce Yves Crevoshay, the Executive Director of Take This, to talk about their programs and the mental health aspects of this conference and the current crisis.
Thank you, Renee. The mission of Take This is to decrease the stigma and increase the support for mental health among people who make and play games. Our vision is a game community that welcomes and supports people experiencing mental health challenges and that recognizes the humanity and mental health of game creators. If you would like to donate to support Take This today and to our partner organizations, please donate to the Stay in the Game Relief Fund at the link below. All donations will be matched. Now, I'd like to switch gears to talk directly about mental health, both generally in the context of the game industry and more specifically about mental health right now. Let me share my screen. And there we are. And again, my name is Yves Crevoshay, and I'm the Executive Director of Take This, and this is how to find me. Why are we here today? We're here today because crises can be hard on mental health, and it doesn't exist in a vacuum. This is a tough time, and it's a time when we need to pay more attention to mental health in order to ensure that we're doing all right and able to show up in the way we need to at our jobs. It's also a time to set up the sustainable, healthy systems and supports that will ensure low burnout and resilience and creativity moving forward as we emerge from the pandemic and from quarantine. Generally, what are the benefits of good mental health practice? What's the business case? It's more creativity, it's more diversity, it's a more experienced workforce, and a more resilient workforce. We know from the research that better games are made when people are more supported, when they are part of more diverse teams, when they are able to stay in jobs, and when they are provided with ongoing supports that make them more resilient and more able to weather challenging periods like what we're experiencing right now. There's a good business case for good mental health practice in the workplace. About a year ago, Take This published a white paper on the state of mental health in the industry. And while all of the issues, job stress and instability, community interaction and harassment, diversity and inclusion, still are relevant, we also have an added one, pandemic, the current environment in which we operate and in which we are trying to do our work and live our lives. So I'm going to touch on that first and then return to our regularly scheduled mental health conversation. If you would like more information, you can find the white paper itself at the link on the screen. So, job stress and instability, which right now includes a healthy dose of uncertainty related to the pandemic, the quarantine, and related effects, which affects everything: our health, our families, our finances, our plans and dreams. We may be, in fact, experiencing the effects of COVID-19 ourselves. We may be experiencing negative health impacts because we're stuck at home. There are lots of ways in which this can impact our health. We also are experiencing significant impacts on our families. We have kids at home. We have families who may be negatively impacted by being out of work or being unduly isolated. Our finances may have taken a hit for a variety of reasons related to ourselves and our families. And we may also be experiencing challenges related to our plans and dreams. We all had lives that we wanted to live. I was supposed to go on a major trip in April and I couldn't do it. We are experiencing really, really major disruption to our lives. So in summary, this is a hard time, and it's okay if you're having a hard time with it. There's been a lot of conversation about self-care and managing this time, but I want to reiterate it because it bears repeating. We can do self-care. We can maintain solid routines for ourselves. We can introduce certain practices into our lives, and we can maintain good boundaries. These are sound really simple. They take hard work. It's worth pointing out that having routines like getting up every morning and meditating, which is a new one, requires, for me, it requires a certain amount of self-discipline. I have to focus on it. I have to commit to it every single morning, but it's worth its weight in gold. And good boundaries means maintaining good boundaries with the people we are quarantining with, if you have people in your house with you, or maintaining good boundaries around work or access to your family and people on video chat. We need to ensure that we maintain boundaries that keep us healthy and support our needs. And also controlling what you can, controlling work hours, like I said, good boundaries, controlling your social media consumption, performing self-care, and managing fear and panic through reality testing, through communicating carefully with friends and family you trust to help you work through your feelings, and probably also monitoring what you consume in terms of media, both social media and news. So, pay attention to what you need. You're going to have to do that in order to maintain wellness during this time. We also, I want to speak to managers here. We need clear expectations and around remote work. We need to understand the difference and efficacy of voice and video communication versus text communication. How are we using these tools inside our organizations, and how are we supporting people to use the most effective tool at the correct time? We need to understand that people's lives are very disrupted. Their routines are disrupted. Their hours are going to be modified in some way. Either they're going to be fewer hours or they're going to be very different hours. And so we need to be able to manage deliverables and manage workflow and work expectations in different ways than we're used to. We need to make sure we're providing people with time to check in, time to have casual conversation among colleagues that we miss when we are not in the office, and make that very intentional and casual. And we also need to make sure, as managers and leaders, that we're providing adequate mental health and self-care support to our employees. That may mean, especially at larger companies, access to EAPs and good healthcare benefits. And it may also just be constant reminders and coaching to individuals about how they are undertaking their own self-care. This is really important. And so I want to encourage everyone to think very deliberately and carefully about how to provide mental health support in the workplace right now. Still, here we are in the game industry making games. Our regularly scheduled stressors have not gone away. They're just compounded by what we're experiencing in the pandemic. And so I want to touch back on what we know about burnout generally and its relationship to job stress and instability. The research which caused burnout to now be categorized as an actual mental health condition indicates that the exhaustion, cynicism, and a sense of ineffectiveness of burnout is caused directly by a lack of autonomy in the workplace, long working hours, especially over extended periods of time, uncertainty about expectations, and the instability of jobs. So the unknowns of what is it that causes, where is my job going to be in 6 months? Am I going to have a job? Is my project going to be canceled or not? And in a hit-driven cyclical business like games, that's a major stressor. And we know that a lot of that can't be avoided, right? We live in a world in which we develop games on a cycle, in which releases and ongoing game updates happen with particular cadences. And so what we need to do is find ways to mitigate the impacts of those cycles on individuals and manage the effects of those cycles on individuals so that we don't have massive burnout across the industry, which leads to people leaving jobs and not showing up in a way that's effective and productive. Burnout and its attendant challenges are really compounded in the game industry by certain cultural myths. The first, and these are myths about how games should or must be made. And the first is secrecy. We operate with, with IP that we want to protect and technology and innovation and that require a certain level of secrecy. But this has become a kind of modus operandi in the industry and limited our ability to share expertise and for individuals in the industry to communicate to others their skills and their experience. And so I think secrecy is a major challenge across the industry that we need to find ways of moving past. The second is this idea that people come to the industry with passion and that they will do anything because of that passion, and relatedly that we can expect anything of them because they are passionate. And this is a pretty harmful and exploitative approach to workforce management, and it's unfortunately a very common one because it assumes that the experience, the knowledge, and the intrinsic excitement and creativity of people is disposable, as opposed to something that's valuable and can be built upon and managed and fostered. And the third is this idea that, which is related to this idea of passion and a disposable workforce, that people who are leaders and who make and design games at the upper levels of management are somehow are somehow infallible, and anything they do and say and expect of their employees is okay. And that this eccentricity of game designers is used as an excuse for, quite frankly, abusive behavior across studios. And so we want to break down those myths. And in fact, in a lot of places, people are trying to develop and imagine new ways of making games, of running studios, and it's wonderful. But those still exist largely on the edges of a very large and very profitable game industry. And I want to just dive a little bit more into why these myths are harmful, what we know about them. We actually have pretty good evidence that games that don't involve crunch or involve smaller amounts of crunch are better games. They have higher Metacritic scores. They are more critically acclaimed. We also know that a culture of secrecy, and I touched on this already, limits the ability of people to demonstrate their skills and to prospective employers. So it limits people's ability to talk about what they've done, especially if they have worked mostly on canceled or postponed games and projects and at closed studios, then they don't have access to their IP and can't talk about what they've done. This can particularly negatively impact artists and folks who've created assets for games which they can't talk about. And we also know that when people have high levels of passion, when they're passionate about something and are not coached to help them separate their work lives from their sense of identity and self-worth, they have a harder time with separation. They have a harder time with layoffs, closures, and cancellations. And so that's a really negative effect, has a really negative effect on people's mental health. And so we're very concerned about that in particular. Okay, I've talked about all the problems. What can we do about it? We do know what the tools are for better studio culture. And the first really is transparency. Transparency and trust of your employees. So sharing financials with your employees, engaging full teams in planning and forecasting, delineating clear career paths, and providing matrixed opportunities for reporting. So this really is about showing people that they have access to advancement, delineating exactly what that means and how to get there, and then providing people with the opportunity to report, especially in a company with multiple games in development. So this is larger studios with the opportunity to report not just to a game producer or designer, but also maybe to an art lead or a audio lead, in a way that allows them to demonstrate their skill and value across the company. Formal communication channels all the way to the top. And finally, an emphasis on soft skills. And soft skills are often misunderstood. Soft skills are the ability to work in teams, the ability to communicate effectively and with kindness and empathy. And these things are, if someone comes into a job not understanding that those are important, or not demonstrating that they understand the value of them, it can be very hard to coach them into that. And so hiring with an emphasis on soft skills is as important as managing with an emphasis on soft skills. There's also really important aspects of project planning and management that support mental health. Tracking actual working hours per week. So understanding exactly how much time people actually have to do work as opposed to sit in meetings or have conversations, and allowing that to guide project planning so that you have realistic ideas about how much time it's going to take and how much can we avoid crunch. Including full teams in reviewing specs so that there's really everyone feels investment in the plan and everybody has input on the plan, and doing ongoing regular reviews of roadmaps, et cetera, and not penalizing people for trying to fix problems. Problems and mistakes are going to happen. And if we penalize people for that, they're not going to try to fix problems and they're going to build up. And then I also want to talk about mental health literacy directly. A lot of what I've talked about are the things that cause mental health challenges, but now we need to build literacy around mental health in game companies and across the industry. And that means basic understanding of mental health terms. It means understanding things like bystander behavior when conflicts arise and people don't engage because they're scared or they feel threatened. Understanding and recognizing the signs of harassment, both in ourselves and in others. For managers and leaders, this means learning to recognize and manage burnout and stress so that you can identify problems before they happen and jump on them. For employees, this means understanding, and this is related to bystander behavior, aggression and assertiveness, and the difference between the two, because one has a place in the workplace and the other does not. And for community managers and moderators, and this is something I'll touch on in more detail later in the talk, it's providing them with tools to give validation and empathy and empathetic support to their community members, but also to how to maintain good boundaries so they can maintain self-care for themselves. And so this is a really important aspect of ensuring good mental health for game employees going forward. And finally, leadership support. And I cannot understate to you how important it is for leaders who are often profoundly isolated and in the culture of secrecy that exists in the game industry, even more profoundly isolated, how important it is to provide support to leaders. Because, and I will say this a few times over the course of this talk, what happens at the top is how the studio goes. If you have leaders who are clear about the importance of mental health, about the importance of diversity, about the importance of support of employees, then you will have good mental health practice. If you don't have that at the top, you won't have it. This has to come from leadership. And so I'm working on, especially in partnership with the IGDA and Renee Gittins, and I'm very excited about this, opportunities to provide executives and leaders with access to mentors and to informal networks that will allow them to develop support for each other. And we're really excited about that development. I'm going to move on now from job stress and instability to community interaction, which really I distill into online harassment and moral panic about games, the negative public perceptions of games. And I want to start by talking about how games are many things to many people. And I think as an industry, have been a little afraid of talking about what games are and are not, and about acknowledging where games might be problematic. And if we can embrace really the full spectrum of what games are, both the good, the bad, the weird, the offbeat, the ugly, then I think we can have a more honest conversation about what games could be and talk with more openness to our communities. And so I'll leave that there. One of the things that we are really that's wonderful about this moment, right? This moment during the pandemic is that the national and the international conversation around games is shifting. It is shifting from one of moral panic to one of celebration and acknowledgement of the benefits of games, that they reduce isolation, they increase interpersonal interaction and friendship, and they provide a creative outlet for people and a fun and playful outlet for people to gather together online. And that's wonderful. And I think it's really a moment to seize for games. But I do want to move on to harassment, because harassment is a major problem online, and it's a major problem across the industry. Harassment is bad. That's not a surprise. What is harder is that silence and inaction really are the same as being complicit. If we do not address harassment directly, forcefully and completely, then we are part of the problem. Full stop. This is not an okay thing. And so I will go to the ends of the earth to maintain this conversation and to encourage people to address it in as forcefully a way as they possibly can. How do we do that? Training and enforcement. We need across the industry zero tolerance harassment policies. This means that we have zero tolerance harassment policies and technology in place across all online game communities, in-game interactions, across all the social media platforms that games use, and in companies that make games. Period. Full stop. There is no and should be no space for harassment in games. And we also need to set the proper tone. We need to create game communities and game studios where there is a focus on positivity, community, mutual support, and celebration of play and of the creativity of games. And when we focus on that, we can we can exclude harassment as a possibility or even as a necessity. I'm not going into this unaware of what the internet is like. I'm just saying that we have the tools available to us to make this a reality if we put all of our attention to it. And then we will have a more inclusive, more welcoming space for more people who want to play games. We also, I think, need to think about how we portray mental illness and self-care and mental health in games themselves. When we have good models of mental health representation in games themselves, then we have better stories to tell, and we have better ways, better metaphors with which to work. This games are a reflection and a commentary on the social, on society. And if we start to shape mental health representation in games in a positive light, then we come from a place of support and inclusion. And that's a really exciting thing. And so I want to encourage everyone to think differently about the way that they portray mental health, mental illness, and self-care in games. And finally, I want to get to diversity and inclusion. This is a tough one because it's not about just what's happening in the industry. It's about what's happening in society writ large. But there is both a moral and a business case for better diversity and inclusion across the industry. And I think we have there's an opportunity here. There's a moment here. This quote is from the GDC State of the Industry report from this year. And I'm going to read it out loud because it's an important one. Quote, even when talking about the disproportionate number of women working in gaming, higher-ups seem to be a little nervous about openly admitting some of the reasons why there might be such hostility directed towards women in gaming. I think many individuals still think that if they are generally liberal-minded, socially conscious individuals, diversity just happens because they're not worried about it. That's not true. And we need to think really deliberately about it. I'm going to go now to the IGDA Developer Satisfaction Survey from last year, where the survey data indicated that people in the industry know that there's high levels of negative feeling towards the industry. But they also indicated that they really wanted to diversify the industry. They wanted to change who made games and what games were made. So this goes back to that mental health representation in games idea, right? How do we have a greater diversity of games? And how do we include more people in the making of games? And we also saw data that indicated that people witness microaggressions and social and interpersonal discrimination at a very high rate, really high rate. It was well over it was over 70%. And microaggressions are these sometimes casual and often unconscious comments that are aimed at people because of their membership in a particular group and are designed to make people feel uncomfortable. And this type of discrimination is what causes burnout and dissatisfaction and a lack of what clinicians call self-efficacy, a lack of a sense of empowerment and effectiveness in their jobs. And it's very pernicious. And so you combine these three ideas, these three survey answers, and you get a snapshot of an industry that's ready to change and needs to change, but doesn't necessarily have the adequate tools. And I will acknowledge that these are tough tools. These are tough tools to pull together. And I'm going to go a little bit into the research just to highlight how important and why we need to address this. It turns out there's a really strong correlation between diversity and financial performance across multiple sectors of the economy. And I'm not going to accept games from that. So we know that with more diverse teams, especially more diverse leadership, you get better financial performance. We also know that increased diversity increases innovation and reduces groupthink. So if we want to be a better industry producing better games and more exciting games, we need better diversity. And I touched a little bit in the previous slide on the effects of burnout and the effects of microaggression and discrimination on people of diverse backgrounds, which causes them to leave the industry or to check out in their jobs. And the costs of that are really high. The cost of replacing people who leave is 50 to 60% higher than retaining people. And the business costs of people who've checked out, who are absentee often, or show up for work but don't really deliver because they're not engaged, is 4 times that of addressing the situation and treating the underlying issue. And so we know there is very good evidence that it pays to have a more diverse workforce, and it pays to retain that workforce, to be inclusive in meaningful, real ways. So how do we do that? It's hard. It is hard. Diversity is a lot of things. And so there's going to be a lot of ways in which you can foster diversity, but all of them are meaningful and all of them are worth pursuing. Diversity includes things that we talk about a lot: gender, race, ethnicity, and sexuality, but includes a lot of other things: mental health status, neurodiversity, people who are on the autism spectrum, for example, disability and ability, religion, and so many more categories. And so we need to pay attention to the tapestry of diversity and include that in our conversation. The tools for ensuring diversity and inclusion, which I think of inclusion as the long-term retention and welcoming of people once they've been hired. So we think of recruitment, we think of training and support, both of leaders and employees, so that leaders have the tools to support, engage, promote, and truly include and respect people of diverse backgrounds. And employees having the same level, the same tools, so that they know how to include and support the full diversity of people with whom they work. And I said this before, I will say it again, none of this works without leadership at the very top levels committing fully and wholeheartedly to diversity and inclusion. And when I say that, I'm talking about policies and procedures, training, yes, but I'm also talking about something that's much more personal. And this is hard work. It is essential. It takes courage. Leadership on diversity and inclusion, especially for those of us who have privilege and are white or cisgender or heterosexual, is absolutely essential. It means that we need to accept the fact that we have to shut up and listen, that we are going to be wrong, that we are going to have to get out of the way, and we are going to have humility. And I can't say that enough. We're going to mess up. It's going to be hard, but with courage, we can do it. And it is essential. And so with that, I want to leave you with the opportunity to access to take this mental health resources. If you are feeling like you're in crisis, or a family or friend or colleague needs access to resources, please go to takethis.org. It's very easy to find our mental health resources, which include access to warm and hotlines across a number of countries and regions, and identifies ways to access more long-term mental health care as you need it. We operate on the principle that it is okay to not be okay. In fact, it's pretty normal to not be okay, especially at a time like this. 50% of all individuals will have some sort of mental health challenge in their lifetime. And we encourage people to embrace that and recognize that it's totally normal and it's okay. And with that, I think we're going to, Renee and I are going to move on to taking questions. And I'm going to stop presenting so you can see my face again.
Hey, that was really wonderful. I think that was a great start to this conference because the mental health aspects of the impacts of this crisis are so important. So,
yeah,
of course, right? So what are you looking forward to hearing about with this conference? There's clearly a lot of talks that are going to be addressing some of these really important topics you brought up.
Yeah, I'm super excited. There's a session this afternoon on some of the tech challenges and kind of mitigation strategies around remote work, and I'm super excited to see that happen. I know that I've got a conversation coming up later today with a number of expats about the unique experience of being in isolation during this time as an expat, being far, far away. So I know that this conference is going to touch on a wide variety of things over the course of the day, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, definitely. I certainly think that it's really interesting to look at the intersections between like social and mental health support and technology, which I think a lot of talks during this conference are going to touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really interesting. We kind of tend to silo things out, and the thing about what's happening right now is that you can't, right? Everything impacts everything else.
Definitely. So one of the people in our chat brought up a really great point that I thought it would be fair to address. They noted that you had left out age on your list of diversity topics, and I imagine that is something that you consider an important part of diversity within games.
Yeah, it really is. And actually, thank you for pointing that out. I will add it to the slide for the next time I give this talk. But I think the thing about age relates really strongly to the issues around retention and burnout in the game industry. And there's a lot of concern about people leaving the industry after a certain number of years because it's a hard industry to be in, and they're burnt out and done with it. And so I think age actually plays really strongly into the intersection of all these issues around mental health and burnout.
Yeah, definitely. And as you know, one of the IGDA's developer satisfaction surveys did show that game developers change jobs 2.2 times over every 5 years on average, which is, a lot to deal with, just constantly changing locations and jobs. So that's clearly part of a huge stressor that does burn people out.
Yeah, it's a real concern. And that job change is a bit of what we talked about in terms of job instability. People leave jobs because it's normal to leave jobs, even when they don't have to.
Right.
And that's hard on people, especially if it involves relocation, which it often does.
Yeah. What is that? There's a thing that tracks the amount of stressors that you've encountered in the last year, and you can add up the numbers, and both moving and starting a new job are two of them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're big. Yeah, there's a term called allostatic load that we talk about in the white paper, which is basically the combined physical and mental impact of stress on your body and well-being. And yeah, that's what you're talking about.
So chat has a question for us. What way are the ways devs can research underrepresented groups so that depictions can be as thoughtful as possible?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think don't think of it as research. Think of it as getting to know people as authentically as possible.
I was gonna say, think of it as discussion, because really you should be talking to people from those groups and getting their perspective and input.
Yeah, but doing it in meaningful ways. There's a lot of great individuals and companies that do that are consultants that do diversity reads and other types of reading and work on accessibility and stuff, and pay them and engage them in a real way and take their advice in terms of the scripts, the narrative design, the actual tech of your games. Though that they exist for a reason, and they are good at what they do, and they will bring meaningful difference to your games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's like, I go back to that. Listen, be quiet, shut up and listen.
Always good advice, no matter what you're doing. So
Yeah.
I really liked in your talk where you were discussing that really this kind of change and the permanence of supporting everyone has to come from the top. Everyone from the CEO down should be truly invested in supporting everyone. Do you have any recommendations for somebody who's at mid-level or even just a junior level trying to get more of those senior people on board?
So this is, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This is a tough one, right? What I would say is that the place often to start is a critical look at who your audience actually is. Because your audience is almost always more diverse than you realize. And if there's this assumption that a lot of people make the games they want to play, but their audience isn't just them, right? And so if you can look at who your audience really is and how diverse it is, then you can start to talk about, well, if we want to reach them more effectively and expand the diversity of our audience, we need to think differently about who we are and who we're making games for, and who we need in our team in order to make those games well. And I think that seems to be the most effective way to start that conversation.
Definitely. I have personal experience with that. So as you know, I've been working on a game called Potions: A Curious Tale. And when I started the game, I was thinking, okay, you're running around, it's almost like a dungeon crawler, but not quite. There's story. I think it'll appeal a lot to gamers who played the old Legend of Zelda games. So I'm thinking like, men, middle-aged, women as well. But when I went out and showed the game at various places, I actually learned, because the main character is a witch, because it has fairy tales and folklore in it, it actually really, really appealed to young girls, like the 8 to 14-year-old range. And that completely changed how I was developing that game. Because I was going for a darker look, for having more scary and possibly teen-rated or above moments. And knowing that I had such a passionate audience of young female gamers completely changed that trajectory to make sure that I was supporting them with the development of the game.
Yeah, listening and discovering. Yeah, for sure. Oh, Renee, your cat came to your...
Yeah, he was trying to get through where there's usually a gap, but not with this current setup. Great. So we're still taking questions for a few more minutes. So if anyone else has questions for Eve about her talk or about the conference, feel free to put them in the chat.
Yep, absolutely. And we also, I want to talk a little bit, Renee, about the webinars that we've been running over the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, please do.
That are also a part of this effort, because there's some really cool webinars that we've run that focus on a variety of the, especially the mental health impacts of dealing with this current crisis. And those are archived on the IGDA Twitch page, which is really awesome. And I encourage people to check them out. Were there some that were particularly interesting to you?
Yeah, I think that I really appreciated the first one, Self-Care 101. There was a lot of really good discussion on learning to take it easy on yourself, because I know that I can be really, really hard on myself. And if I feel like I'm not being productive, I can get into this downward stress spiral where I'm so stressed, so I'm not productive. So I'm going to stress more about not being productive, and it just never fixes itself. So hearing other people be like, yeah, it's okay to be stressed. Take a breath, take a break, meditate, exercise. That's really important to me, and it really resonated well with me.
Yeah, that was a super important one. That's why we started there, right?
Definitely.
Yesterday after dinner, I couldn't do anything. I wasn't forming sentences. I was exhausted, and so I went to bed really early. And it's things like getting enough sleep that are really important, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I have to say, it helped.
Yeah, as you know, I've actually just changed my schedule, so I'm waking up at 5 a.m., which, sounds brutal to most people. It means I'm going to bed early. But I found that having that morning time to myself, like making a big breakfast, sitting out in the backyard and drinking tea with my pets, that really helps me start the day well. And it starts me off on a way better foot than just rolling out of bed and straight into emails and meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, if I noticed that some people have noted that they've missed the previous webinar series, they're all available on the IGDA YouTube. If you look at the IGDA's COVID-19 resources page, you can also find them there. And of course, they are available on Twitch for the last 14-day period. But again, just go to the IGDA's YouTube and you'll find all of the other talks there.
Awesome. Yep. And I want to point out too that Take This has put together a series of articles on coping with COVID that range from very personal, like how do you manage panic buying, to managing a team remotely. And so those articles are available on our website as well, takethis.org.
So we have
I see another question came through. Can you talk more about absenteeism and presenteeism? So I wanted to touch on that. So that's a good question. Absenteeism is frequently being out of work because you are unwell in some way, and absenteeism can be caused by physical health problems, by family disruptions, and by mental health problems. And in this case, I was specifically talking about mental health challenges that contribute to absenteeism. Presenteeism is a really useful term that is people who show up to work because they don't have a specific reason not to, but are not productive. They are unengaged, they don't feel efficacious, they don't feel like they have a reason to contribute, they don't care enough to contribute, or they don't have the support necessary to contribute. So that can be a variety of things, but that's presenteeism, is showing up and not having a really productive experience at work.
That's great. I knew absenteeism, but I wasn't familiar with presenteeism. So I'm learning something new, certainly.
Yep. Building relationships with game composers. Oh, that's a really interesting one.
So, this Crisis conference is focused on providing game developers with tools and skills and resources they need to overcome this current crisis. So it's about self-care, about studio management, and about technical difficulties in times of crisis. However, if you have questions about game development in general, or connecting with different types of game developers, or building your own network, the IGDA has an expansive series of resources. We run regular webinars, and we also have a great Discord with an advice channel where you can just post your questions in there, and there's 1,400 professional game developers in there who will be happy to give you answers. So just go to igda.org and you'll find all of those resources there.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks. So yeah, in fact, one of the other, kind of to that, the point of that question, one of the other webinars that we ran over the last 6 weeks was focused on building, maintaining empathy and a positive studio culture, right? And those are the basic building blocks for where you want to get in building these positive relationships with contractors, with specialists in various disciplines across game development. So that's really interesting. And I want to note too that Take This offers a number of trainings and mental health trainings and workshops for companies that build on that idea of building empathy and understanding basic mental health literacy that facilitate positive, productive relationships and across all disciplines in game companies.
I definitely think that empathy is one of the best skills that you can have to work in any professional environment. Because if you're working with other people or making things for other people, empathy is such a powerful tool to understand what you should be doing, how you should be communicating, and more.
Yep. Yep. I see another question just came through. How does one make sure diversity doesn't feel forced in games or characters? This is a good one. And I'll go back to the way we talk about mental health representation in games, and the ideal is that the diversity, the character should be diverse not as a character or a plot point, but just because they are who they are, right? That you want diversity to just appear in the world as it does, and to let that be not irrelevant, but not the plot point.
Right. It's like why not all of your characters have the same hair color unless there's some plot reason for them to all have the same character. Diversity should be just a standard part, not something that is injected, I guess. So I think that, think about creating a D&D party. You don't want everyone to be a cleric. Having diversity within it brings those characters to have a lot of interesting aspects and qualities, but also a lot of interesting backgrounds. So diversity might not just be the color of their skin, it might be how they were raised, or, their other preferences.
Yep. Yeah. But I would also say that as a white heterosexual woman, I'm not the authority on this.
Yeah,
there are
true.
Other people who are the authority on this, who are not me. And I think that's really important to just keep saying, that the people, that the more diversity you bring into the conversation among the people who make these games and who develop these characters, the more authentic that's going to be.
Definitely. Yeah, as I was saying before, I wasn't trying to make a game for women, for girls. But just because I am a woman who was making game, it turned out that was the audience that it resonated with most. So if you have a diverse cast of developers, then they'll create a diverse cast of characters and a diverse game that appeals to a diverse audience. And the more people that your game can appeal to, the bigger that audience is.
Yep. That's totally true. So I guess we want to leave it open for a few more questions before we transfer and get ready for our next session.
Yeah. So our next session coming up is the good of games. I know that this is something that you're quite passionate about. What are you looking forward to hearing about in that session?
Well, this session coming up is really interesting because it includes a diverse array of people focused on a range of ways in which games bring good into the world, right? And take this research director, Rachel Cowart, whose background is on media effects research. So what are the ways in which games produce positive social connections and increase persistence and other skills? And Arana from Games for Change talking about learning games and the way games can teach us things and enrich our lives. And we've got Travis Erickson from from Child's Play talking about the wonderful ways in which games support kids who are having major health crises and provide them with a lot of tools to cope with that experience in the hospital. And also Hans Ten Kate talking about the ways in which the game industry itself is bringing its financial power and its size to bear on fundraising and support for a variety of financial causes. So it's just a really interesting reframing of that conversation around what games bring to the world, right?
Yeah.
Because they bring a lot of wonderful and exciting things to the world. And I'm really happy to be able to highlight that and celebrate that as part of this conference, because at its root, our organizations, we're advocates and we delight in games, and we want to make that really clear and give people the tools to do that on a more sustainable basis.
Definitely. I completely agree. Well, so speaking of that, the Good of Games panel, since there are no more questions from the audience, we'll transfer over and we'll be back in a few minutes with that panel. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope you stick around for these 7 amazing panels and talks that we have for you today.